It is almost time for the summer semester of my Old Norse classes to begin. So, starting Sunday, June 2nd, a $407 ticket gets you access to either the beginning course, which takes you from maybe knowing nothing about other languages at all to reading the Prose Edda and text from the Poetic Edda. And there's also the advanced class, which takes off from where that left off, improving your abilities at reading by exposing you to more genres, as well as some manuscript reading, and even a little tiny bit of reading in the younger Frühlicher Runic alphabet. There's also going to be a myth course offered by my old teaching assistant from the University of Colorado, Taylor Budde, so watch for some more details about that. And if any of this interests you, go check out the Eventbrite page and sign up. And hopefully there will be some feedback on YouTube here from people who have taken the course who can let you know what to expect from their perspective. Beautiful Wyoming, wishing you all the best. Hey Taylor, how are you?
Well, how are you?
Doing all right. Can you hear me all right?
I can.
All right. Um, Kind of weird to be doing this remotely, but this is just the timing, and we might as well talk about, especially the stuff with the class, as
Yeah.
early as we can. I thought probably what we do is start off talking about the classes, make sure that we can kind of address any questions anybody has about that,
Sure.
and then maybe just sort of, let our hair down with some Volsung stuff after that. If you want to talk a little bit about your work with that, maybe we can uh, get into some fun topics there. Does that sound all right?
Perfect.
All right. Well, folks, let me welcome once again Taylor Budde of the University of Colorado Boulder. Once, a long time ago, my teaching assistant there, still a teaching assistant in several Scandinavian classes, as well as an independent instructor, some classes in Scandinavian and German. And now talking about running a Norse myth class, sort of similar to my Zoom classes that I've been running independently. And I thought we'd get a little bit about what your top level thoughts about that are. But first, Taylor, where were you on November 22nd, 1963?
Oh man, this is where I make that. I would have been the gleam in the gleam of an eye at that point.
So much about gotcha. Uh, mhm. Well, that's suspicious. Kind of a suspicious no answer there, but um,
Right. Well, I mean, thinking about, I do have flashbacks occasionally to things like grassy knolls and to
um,
Dallas for some reason. Right?
someone with an umbrella. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Stephen King was there. Weird.
Yeah. Uh, Interesting deep cut. Uh, so we got to talking about how my Old Norse class, I think it's gone pretty well. We're wrapping up the spring semester right now. Our last meeting will be Friday for a Friday group and Sunday for my Sunday group. And then 2 weeks after that, I'll start my summer semester. And you were thinking about starting about the same time? Because I'll start Sunday, June 2nd is when the Old Norse classes will start again.
I believe I'm sort of waiting on some slight confirmation on my end where it'll begin on the 2nd or the 9th and then run through the end of August and then through for the 12-week portion and then the 16-week will run through September.
So yeah, explain the difference between your 12 week and your 16 week, or actually start. Let's get to that, but start with what should people know before they start? Because I've had a lot of people ask, like, well, do I need to know Old Norse? Do I need to have something in particular? Do I need to have some particular background? Like, what would you say? Are there prereqs or the things you would want people to think about before they start?
Well, no, not really. So I'm calling it Introduction to Old Norse Mythology, and I do mean for it to be like a true introduction. Like it requires no experience, but also be at a like it is as in the way I'm thinking about it is an upper division university level course, right? Minus the homework and sort of administrative tedium, um, the bits and pieces that we have in those classes to teach people like, and here's how to write it, here's how to cite a source. I know
Right.
it's your third year in college, but this is called a footnote. I will expect these in your paper. So you don't have to do that necessarily, but I do mean for it to be a step in. The course is conducted in English. I will be reading the translations in English just because it's the one. Um, I mean, if people felt very strongly about it, I suppose we could find the German translations, but I don't know much about the quality of those compared to um, the English ones necessarily. Um, but yeah, so it's running as an introduction course. It doesn't require any training or background necessarily. I do mean for it to be a an entry level. You come in and do this. However, additionally, if you do have a background in it, we will get into some of the, I don't want to say finer details, but essentially we will start with whatever topic we will be approaching. It'll be fairly broad at first, right? We will go to like we'll be using the poetic and the prose edda, looking at these sources directly, um, sort of seeing what happens in the actual stories, these and the poems, and then from there, barring I get some emails back from some folks and things, I'll either provide articles or additional reading that won't necessarily be required, but there'll be things I'll then go in and discuss. So, we'll talk about, the debate between Freya and Frigg, right? Like, is this the same deity or were they at one time, or how do people approach that sort of question, right? So we start broadly, discuss them as um, individual figures, what role they play, like what little bits are there in the mythology for them, right? Before then moving into some of the academic, scholarly debates and thoughts about them.
Okay.
And then from there, which hopefully suffices, or, is a good. I imagine some people will be taking it will have read the Poetic and Prose Edda. So I want to put this here, or I will have this additional material for them as well. So we can go and look at, well, this is this is the work that is being done on these questions right now as well. And then talk about that. And ultimately, I would just like people to sort of have a much better understanding of what Old Norse mythology actually is, as opposed to what something like Old Norse mythology for smartpeople.com or something, like what the internet says it is.
Right.
And be able to take, to build a sort of base level expertise that when they encounter these things in the wild or have these discussions, they are grounded in the actual poems and texts and material and have some awareness of, the debates about X or Y, this sort of thing, or they inform their own opinion about, well, how, what do we think about the Christian influence in Voluspa or the shorter Voluspa,
Hmm.
right? Where I will provide um, some general thoughts, some of the scholarly discourse around it, but then not in, possibly get to my own thoughts, but never in the point of like, and this is the truth, right? This is the accurate way to go about it.
Sure. So, I mean, not to put words in your mouth, but I think what I like about your approach in general is that it's about uh, putting resources in your hands and sharing what other people have thought about these resources, but not saying this is what you have to think about these resources. But these
Right.
are the sources. These are the resources. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are certainly, I've read my own fair share of articles that I would disagree with at a certain level.
Sure.
Uh, but as much as that, I also appreciate um, the work that goes into that and the sort of a particular approach or someone's understanding of it is not necessarily mine, and I might disagree on um, certain other levels, but it's, I have my own training is also from a literary background, and then also since I attended the University of Minnesota, which is a fairly strong, we'll call it a Germanic program there, like mixing in with everything. I do have some cultural and sort of historical lenses that they focused on that we moved through there that are not necessarily the same as someone else here.
And your
Uh,
forehead has been touched by the holy finger of Anatoly Lieberman.
That's right. I did study. My first Old Norse mythology class was literally at the feet of Anatoly Lieberman. So, um, the three courses I ended up taking with him. So I doubt, actually, I don't doubt he would remember me. I'm almost positive if I came back, he'd be like, "Oh yes, Taylor, you were a mediocre student, but I was so happy to have you in class, right? Your German was well, it was not the best. Your knowledge of Old Norse, non-existent, but sort of have that there. Yeah, I'll address your question now too. Because again, it seems like you have to leave early, which is totally fine. Um, so before I get into the nitty-gritty of the course, right now, the way that it operates is I have a 12-week option and a 16-week option. Now, um, the 12-week option is essentially what I would call that would be um, the university upper division level course, right? Like we will cover enough material, poems, figures, things for that you would get that level of material, um, and to have a chance to discuss it and go on. Like that is essentially the class, right? However, we also um, so at CU Boulder, semesters run 16 weeks, right? Now, that 4-week difference there is in part to due to things like administrative work, papers, right? Getting students ready to do things. And what I wanted to do then was offer the class. So 12-week is the normal one, but if you choose to take the 16-week, that would be 4 weeks where collaboratively between me and the students or whatever, we would come together and sort of figure out four topics that are related to Old Norse mythology that wouldn't necessarily be traditionally put in a 12-week in a normal semester of work, right? And what I mean by that is it's kind of a different, you know, through the class, you might be very much interested in like, well, what are um, for me, it would be something like, what are the implications of Old Norse mythology on the contemporary fantasy genre, right? That's not necessarily a topic you get in a traditional Old Norse mythology class at the university level, but is something that I think might interest a lot of, someone might have some interest in that I would be happy to do. We'll say bespoke research for and put together a lecture at a similar level to the other ones and, a lecture, a course, a class based on the previous weeks to that, where we go into whether it requires me to do extra research. I will be fine with that. But um, having a chance to look at things that are related to Old Norse mythology that aren't necessarily something you would find in a traditional Old Norse mythology course.
Hmm.
So, Lazani, yes, I am looking into an option to add on to where if you enroll in the 12-week class, then later on you can join the 16-week class. That would be totally fine. Everbright is giving me some slight difficulties with figuring out some of these options, but and the extra 4 week.
I think
Yes, we will cover the Viking dinosaur relations as talked about in a video a few years ago. I
I
think
guess.
this might have been the shirt I was wearing to I can't remember my Minnesota name for by
Oh
golly,
yeah.
back in the homeland.
Weren't you Oscar Johan Nordgren or
Well,
something?
yeah, yeah, something like that.
Um, I was just thinking maybe you sell the 12-week ticket separately from like a 4-week add-on ticket. Like just do it as two different tickets.
Yeah, right now it's so the way it's set up is there's an option to buy a ticket for the 12-week course and there's an option to buy one for the 16-week one. I need to find a way to have it where someone can then pay the difference to get into.
Yeah, so just what I'm saying is just make it like a just sell a 12-week and a 4-week instead of a 12-week and a 16-week. See what I mean?
Oh, right, right, right. Yeah, just sell them separately. Yeah, yeah, that would be them. Yeah, that would work.
The only thing that you would potentially get there is people who come in for the last 4 weeks, but not for the earlier 12, which I mean, I don't know if that's a
I,
problem or not, but
I guess, like, yeah, I guess that would be fine, right? Um, so that'll, yeah, I think I'm hoping to have now that the semester is at CU is over, I will have much more time to devote to today and tomorrow and get it. Um, right, yeah, that's the other issue, right? Is then they're paying fees twice for buying two
true.
separate tickets.
That's true. But
In all honesty, I might just have it. I'll see what, the folks here in chat thinks, right? Is you buy a 12-week or you could buy the 16-week, and then if you buy the 12-week and want to opt in later, you can email me and we can find a way to
well, that's a possibility. Yeah, it's like you don't even like Eventbrite doesn't have to be the middleman for every single thing. Like
right,
the thing that it's nice for, and maybe this is too like inside baseball for this discussion, but is that it gives you the ability to reach out kind of instantaneously to anyone who is enrolled. It
right,
allows you to share stuff with those people, like knowing that they're the ones that got the tickets or whatever.
right.
And also, no matter how you do it, you're paying fees to somebody, right? You're going to pay some giant fee to PayPal if people are PayPaling you money for goods and services. So, like, no matter what you do, you've got a fee to pay. Uh, and I think Eventbrite is a better cut for you than PayPal goods and services is.
Right.
There was another question on there from Jazz who I think left before I could find an actual place to put this in. Because I think Jazz was maybe asking about the Old Norse language class. Um, like how long would that course be and how long?
Sure, yeah.
So I'm going to do the both language classes. I'm going to do the intro one again, and then simultaneously an advanced reading course, and I'll just make both of those 16 weeks. The thing I'm going to do differently, and Taylor, maybe you'd be interested in doing something like this too, is this time I'm going to build in 2 break weeks. So after 5 weeks, there'll be a break week, and then after another 5 weeks, there'll be another break week. So it's not going to be every Sunday for 16 weeks. There will be two two breaks. I think that will help. Um, Probably help students consolidate some stuff at two. That roughly coincides at two big junctures in the intro class anyway. And for me, also, I'm going to Iceland for the first one, and like ironically, going to Iceland will make it harder to run an Old Norse class. So
Right.
yeah, so around 4th of July, mid-August, exactly Anders, yeah, would be my plan. So that would also the mid-August one would be probably roughly equivalent to if someone's in school or
Right.
teaching in the school, roughly when it would be starting again. Um, and then I think what I'll do too is try to standardize my class links at an hour and a half because to start with, and maybe again, this is too inside baseball, but this also might be stuff for you to think about, Taylor. To start with, I was trying to hit an hour a week, and then that became way too little. But then, but then 2 hours, which I sometimes our meetings have stretched out to, I feel like everybody's tired at 2 hours. So I feel like if I just standardize and say, okay, this lasts an hour and a half, um, especially since I'm doing back to back beginning and advanced classes, I think an hour and a half is about right for me.
Right.
Because
I know for me, um, I mean, this is one of the challenges though of teaching a language course versus what I will be doing. Um, my plans thus far is just sort of like the first 45, 50 minutes or so will be lecture, I guess, in a way, right? Where we'll kind of walk over and talk about the topic. There'll be a short break. And then afterward, I would like to get into more of essentially discussion, right? And that's when we get more to the sort of in-depth secondary material, things about it, um, up to another hour. But if, the discussion, if, people are tired, a lot of people need to leave early, right? Or it's less, um, there's less to be said.
yeah,
We could leave early, right? The class could end early. Another advantage of, doing it this way is it's not, there's no university man, like there's no one there making sure, right? Like,
yeah. Well, there was no one there making sure at CU either. I mean, you remember how often I would hit like 25 minutes with what I thought was a 50-minute lecture. And since no one cared about it, right? Because you'd be talking to students who are just there for whatever credit, like
right.
no one asks questions. So you run through the material twice as fast. It's like, well, okay. I mean, I guess I'll let you go. Like,
It's, I don't, it's like, listen, you folks are paying for it, right? So it's not,
yeah. Well, or in that case, their parents are. It's so different with different audiences, right? Because I feel like the Old Norse language class could probably go 3 hours with some of the people who come, right?
right,
Um, and I can't imagine how that would have happened at a university because even like Old Norse language, people will do it for whatever weird credit they can get for it, right?
right,
So, uh, that's yeah. So I think I'm going to standardize around 1.5 hours, and I do think that's probably not the most important change that I'm making after the experience of the first semester. I think the most important change I'm making after the experience of the first semester is building in breaks.
right.
So, um, another thing that I've been doing the first semester that, um, again, maybe this is too inside baseball. Maybe this is useful. But I had anticipated doing this very spontaneous um, office hours thing. Like basically the way I envisioned it was people would be emailing me with questions that I would say, let's go on Zoom and talk about this. And I'll tell everybody that we're on Zoom and you can come and um, and participate and ask your questions and we'll do some extra readings. Um, I think one thing that kind of surprised me was that that sort of spontaneous idea didn't catch on, but kind of scheduled office hours did. So what I wound up doing in the particularly like in the back half of the spring semester is on typically Wednesday mornings and Friday afternoons, I would be getting on for about an hour to do some extra readings with students and address some questions and things like that. And I
Right.
think that office hours are a really useful um, release valve for, in a sense, because so many people do have the same questions,
Right.
right? So uh, you can email me, 10 people can email me the same question, or they can come on Zoom and
Yeah.
get it addressed all together and in a way that's probably although I'm a moron in spoken as well as written language, in a way where you at least have the ability to ask me as it's going what I'm talking about.
So what's the blazing saddles? They're the people. They're the clay of the earth. You know, morons. Right. It's like,
Well, that's me, um, for sure. Uh,
uh, I think that's great. I do plan on having office hours for mine. I think I might have like sort of semi-permanent times that might have to move on a week by week basis, just based on um, some other scheduling things that inevitably will come up. Um, having I am the father of two children, and occasionally things, they will get sick or um,
right, right.
sometimes someone needs a break from them. And I need to be able to do that as well. But yes, I think for each, on that note, sort of following your example, I plan on having a class in the morning and the evening.
Do you have a
I
schedule yet or a proposed schedule?
it's really depends on when my other job will get back to me on that. Right now, the easiest I think would be probably a Monday or Tuesday night, like a 7 to 9, and then a Monday or through Thursday morning, um, run the course, run the morning course that day as well. Just because I can't guarantee, for my other obligations and things that won't affect it. But if I have a time, ideally, I'd like to run it on the same day, and then I can set aside like this is a teaching day, and then I go to my
Right,
other bosses and say Monday I teach in the morning and I teach in the evening, so I'm unavailable that
right,
day.
right. Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna it I'm probably gonna be trying that myself, like just making Sunday my Zoom teaching day where I'm just chained to Zoom.
Right.
Um, and then office hours on whatever days that winds up working for people. Um, okay. Um, I'll probably be announcing mine publicly, posting the Eventbrite page pretty soon. I'm going to make it available to Patreon and Ko-Fi first.
Right.
We'll see I don't think it'll fill up, but just in case one of them were to fill up. My Eventbrite account, and I forget how this works, uh, like what you have to pay for or not, but mine caps things at 250. So I don't know what if you want to cap at
As
like a
far
lower
as attendees,
number.
yeah, I think they had mine. Looking at them, it was like 200 and something too. But that's yeah, I'm hoping to have my page done today or tomorrow, assuming I stop receiving emails about grades.
Yeah,
So,
right, right.
um, right, and Lezani too. Yep, I will. That's why I want to offer a morning time, at least for us over here, just to let. I know Jackson, you do this too, right? Is to just let a like a 9 to 11, I think is what you do yours at.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's been my Friday, which has been Friday evening in Europe and Africa. Um, the I think the challenge there is that on a weeknight, you might have people who won't be able to do it who could do it on a weekend night. But of course, you have a complicated schedule. Um,
yeah,
and as you said, you're a dad with two other jobs beyond this, and yeah, so you've got to make it work for you. Um, I mean, surely that will give a different cast to our different classes here because you're a young man on the go with family responsibilities. You're the pater familias, and I'm just this you know this desperate middle-aged loser who's just trying to grub every last coin that I can before finally expiring. And it really makes a difference in our different approaches, right? Um,
uh,
Actually, my true desperation is to get out of living in crappy apartments. So,
I mean that's one day, not that my I wouldn't call where we currently are crappy, yes, but it's like the inevitability of like I'll have a backyard one day, right? I have like a fence I can throw my like a place to just throw my children and be like, go play and stay away from me for a little bit. Uh, don't die, just go eat dirt or something.
hmm. I mean, you want that place that's yours where Oliver can come up to you and just be like, Dad, can we have a catch, Dad? And like a single tear rolls down your cheek because you.
Right, it's like buried, like I just have stacks of books or whatever. At that time maybe not. Like that's probably not stacks of books, right? It'll be a laptop doing some sort of work, but the idea of me having a bunch of academic articles to do work in the future is contingent on an academic job market. So, that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you could always be like Indiana Jones' dad in the
The
Last
last
Crusade,
crusade,
right? It's
right?
like,
Do it in Greek,
wait,
right?
count to 10 in Greek.
Greek, right?
You know, the house that they live in at the beginning of that movie is it's in southern Colorado and it is an Airbnb. So you can in fact stay there. How do I know this?
There's a future April Fool's, there's investment in that, right? But
Oh my God. Oh man, like
in
reenacting.
Gothic instead, yeah, you
Gothic.
like do it in Gothic.
Oh man. Um, oh man, that there could be something fun to do with April
Have a
Fools.
shirt that's just the text of Jacob's Law of Linguistics.
There may not even be an April Fool's video. That may just be a, finely snapped video, just reenacting scenes from the last episode, just like we did with Jurassic Park, right? I mean, I,
Or
I couldn't even tell you when we did that, why we were doing it. It's just like we need to do it.
it was well, it was because you had what was it like a month or two ago when you visited, you had the knife that was curved,
Yeah, right, right,
like
right.
one, right? And then we were looking at, and then you had the bone this time. But I mean, yeah, we have that. You would do the American Psycho, the new rune, right? Check it out, new rune.
That's bone.
It's just a bone.
That's a font called Cillian Fudar. Oh. Uh,
This
okay.
is this is I'm very this is just like I've derailed this beyond all.
Well, I mean, I participated in derailing it. Brandon
Renovic, I have
says,
a real question here I can answer.
yeah,
I don't plan on giving writing assignments. The discussions will, I think, happen on Zoom, making use of like the Zoom rooms or what, like just opening it for general discussion. If people wanted, um, I could, I could design writing assignments for things. Um, Part of the way I wanted to run the class was to just minimize the amount of like the homework aspect of it. Um, Operating on the assumption that anyone taking the course is already invested in it in a way that doesn't require um, people to like everyone is busy, right? I'm sure like it's not that. So I'm not trying to give out homework beyond like, hey, this week we're gonna talk about Thor. It's gonna be these poems. If I have a chance, I'll be like, and here's an article from John Lindau that I will be referencing in the back. Like here's a couple articles I will be avoiding in the background. Blake, I mean, it is. I'm already grading this summer for some summer courses, so um, and the way the summer grading works is particularly fun because I'm graded per student. So it's me emailing back and forth with our administrator to say, no, let more keep adding students. It doesn't matter. Like I'm paid by the students. So
wow.
uh, we just let it go that way. And then some of us need homework to put. I mean, yeah, like I suppose that's a good point, Peter, right? Is like having the homework is providing structure. Really, the homework for me is like this is what we will be reading. Like there will be an expectation of come to the course having read these poems and possibly an article. Um, I might I probably will send out questions before each class too to say, okay, this is whatever the topic is this week, and these will be some of the broader questions we will address, with the option then for you folks to write with like obviously you can go and then answer those questions on your own and sort of have your own take on it before coming in that might change or not change depending on the class.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Um, basically before you come to class this day, I'm assuming you've read this. Uh,
Right.
I
The
mean, I guess,
assumption will be like you've read these poems, right? And we've read these pages out of Snorri's Edda, um, again, right? With some guiding questions, possibly, just sort of for the day.
yeah, I think it's reasonable. That ends up being a lot like the language class where, I had a particular uh, part of the proto textbook for them to read, and there was a reading, um, not exactly translation, but a reading in Old Norse for them to do. Um, I guess you could give extra points for people who want to do it in Old Norse, right?
Right.
Um, but in
That'd
the
be like that. That'd be the advantageous, for folks. Take both, and then you can read the Old Norse
yeah,
with
yeah.
the English, right?
Um, and of course, in the Old Norse language class, I've focused on texts that I think people kind of want to read. So we've leaned towards stuff from the prose edda and a little bit from the poetic edda. So that does tie in pretty nicely. Um, okay, I think I have a good sense of what you're doing.
Right.
Are there people who have other questions about what Taylor's planning to do or what I'm planning to do? Because I'm happy to make this as much as we need it to be a forum about that.
The classes, yeah.
Well, and then so there's a remark from Peter Rogers about until we started preparing stuff in advance and doing the random victim contribution stuff. So I would actually roll dice to decide who would do readings. And it works really well.
Right. Yeah.
Before that, I didn't get much out of the readings because it was going over my head. But after a little preparation, it helped to focus on what I didn't know. Yeah, I mean, like I learned like and definitely now in the classes going forward, I'm going to be doing the randomness for deciding who gets to read.
See, I like that that's built in because when I teach, it's more of a threat. I just have everyone's name on a card, right? So when we sit in the classroom and no one's talking, I just start shuffling a deck of cards with people's name on them. Be like, Jason, what do you think about this? It'll be difficult for you since you haven't done the reading, but we made it this far.
I just like to start a huge fire with those index cards with the names and just toss a name into the fire and say,
Here
you're
you go.
you're currently in the fire, you tell me. Um, Matt says,
That
how's the advanced Old Norse class going to work? What will it look like? So my picture with that is since the textbook that's under preparation is more for like an intro class, I don't currently plan to write out lessons that are equivalent to the the typically grammar focused lessons that are in the intro class textbook. What I plan to do for this is probably say, all right, this is your reading, and this will and it will be a fairly wide variety. Try to focus on things that I think are kind of fun, but we'll branch out from the very prose edda based readings we've been doing in the intro class. Some of it will be manuscript reading, um, but that won't be overwhelmingly the focus because, of course, most reading that you're ever going to do is going to be from edited text. But I want to make sure that you've got that manuscript ability, and I want to do a little tiny bit about younger Futhark, but I don't want to make a big focus on that. Um, Probably what I'll do is basically produce like a handout for each week that might be roughly equivalent to a small chapter from the intro class, but I'm not going to hold myself to making it a long chapter, right? Even if there's a lot of material we want to cover about, say, reading manuscripts or something, I'd rather it'll be so much easier to do that actually on Zoom with being able to look at a picture.
Right. I mean, that's one of the challenges with Old Norse in particular, right? Is it's a manuscript culture in a lot of ways. It's not like it's easy to just produce. Like part of learning the language is also in a way like, and here's what a medieval manuscript looks like, and how you would, go about reading such a thing.
Well, and I think if I have a theme for my teaching that I think is relevant to both the intro and the advanced course, it's you are as smart as anyone else. Here is the ability to call people, including me, on their bullshit, right?
Right.
Like this is, and I think that's also without the language aspect, similar to the theme you're talking about for the myth class. It's like, here are the sources. It's, you know, your call in a sense what this means, because I'm giving you access to it, and I want to put in the ability to have access to the language of the original manuscript, right? Well, this word looks weird. Let me have the ability to go and find it in, the oldest source that I can find it in and say, oh, this is spelled weird, or actually the editor made a really weird decision here. And I don't know. I want to give people that resource. I hope that
Yes.
semi answers that. Hero says, what does the Old Norse Advanced Old Norse class contain? Not sure how many ready for it this year because I need to consolidate everything we've done this session. And there was a related one. Lazani said, if one is not fully up to date on the current course, would it make sense to join the follow-up? Um, with the advanced course, I mean, just like the intro one, I'm not going to force people to read, for example. So, like, if you never quite caught up or felt like you were caught up on the intro course, I think that you could profitably um, be like working your way through the late chapters of the intro course while still coming to the advanced one and doing the readings, or doing as much as you can of the readings for that. Um, so I don't think that I think if you are, I wish I could give you an easy diagnostic, but I think that if you have come to the intro class, even if you don't feel like you are fully up to week 16 and week 16, I think you are okay on the advanced course. If you took the intro course and you're still at the point where like nominative, accusative are difficult for you, I would say you're probably not ready. But if you're at the point where it's like, I mean, I can read, like I don't get all the words, the syntax is sometimes still weird to me. I think that's okay, right? Um, there's not a like I guess I would say, like, even if you're sort of, this isn't to derogate anyone, but if your self-assessment is that you're kind of a C in the intro course, I think you can still do the advanced course. Um, but probably not a D or F. That makes sense. And Peter Rogers says, I know it's not your intention at the moment, but a younger food like Rinson's put a Norse, but a dramatic stuff, of course. Yeah, so another course that I would like to try to do, and I think it's different from the Advanced Old Norse class, is a an Elder Futhark and Gothic class. I think that would actually work as one class, because what you're looking at is like Germanic pre-mutation. Uh, Gothic's a lot like Proto-Norse. So I think like learning to read some Gothic and learning Elder Futhark at about the same time, I think that's a good class. But believe it or not, it's a surprising amount of time running these classes, and I was willing to add one in the summer, but I thought trying to add two in the summer, even with, I don't know what these balloons just came from. It's like even with the uh, even with my grand ambitions or whatever, I just don't feel like it would be safe to try to add two classes right now. Um, Maybe in the fall, right? If all goes well with this, uh, I'll do like the Gothic Elder Futhark one, and maybe that could be a something I could like alternate with the Advanced Old Norse class or something.
Right.
I don't know.
I mean, that makes sense as like, right, like the fall spring semester type work,
Yeah,
right?
maybe something like that.
One there, one there. So every fall it's this, every spring it's
Yeah,
the annual offering.
yeah, and who knows what the future holds, right? I feel like 16 weeks nicely breaks the year into three.
Right.
So if this becomes, as it seems to be becoming, kind of a standard feature of my year, then maybe there could be kind of a standard like spring, summer, fall offerings, right?
Right.
So like in the spring, you have the option of doing this, but this is only offered in the summers, or this is only offered in the fall, or something like that.
Right.
And I think potentially you could do something similar, right? I mean, because you've taught or assisted in teaching a lot of classes too. Um, and I think, for example, that there could be room for a good um, sagas in translation class, right? I think that could be really neat. Um, yeah. Anyway, I mean,
Yeah, Blake, you're right. We do need a course catalog, right? Like,
yeah.
we'll go it.
Well, and since you're going to pay 50% of your profits to me as protection money
Yeah,
because of compromising photos of you, you've got to come up with
right.
multiple.
Exactly. I gotta make that blackmail money somehow. I can't have can't have Arna finding out his pictures of me.
Yeah, you sure wouldn't want Lauren seeing this picture, would you? It's a but also part of this, and I don't want to sound too grandiose ever, but part of this too is we're exploring ways for academics to share expertise directly with people who really want it, to make a fair, but not, you know, impossible to pay um, wage off of it, and not to have, all the middlemen that make university expenses so much, right?
Yeah,
I mean, this is something that, like, you and I are kind of working together on this, but we're not, but I'm not creating like some superstructure administration. Like
right.
that, we're just, it's very, very indie.
Right, yeah. But I mean really it was the equivalent of like, hey, just like you told me, it's like you should just do what I did, but do it for the like, right. It's like, yeah, really that um, you know, oh yeah, you have to update your web page. Right.
Yeah, I probably do. My webpage it's a fossil right now. But nobody looks at it. So it's like my homepage is effectively the YouTube page. So I've kind of neglected the actual domain. I do need to put something up about this. If you took the intro spring class, at least to start with, I plan to do the intro summer class using the same Zoom link so you can still come to that. Just remember that I will lose the ability to email the whole group. Um, so you'll have to email me independently if I do have to change the Zoom link. But people who took the intro class in spring are welcome to take the intro class in summer too, uh, just to catch up a little bit better. And of course, the um, Vimeo uploads of the spring classes, I'll leave those up online. Yeah, no charge to revisit the intro class. Um, only to do the advanced class or to take the intro. Basically, you pay for the intro class once, you pay for the advanced class once, but once you have paid for it, you can kind of like be an eternal student in that class if you want, if you see what I'm saying. Um, just because I think that I'm not a businessman, unfortunately. Like I should have been, I guess, but I there's always something, and Taylor, see if you sort of sympathize, but I think there's always something about being an academic and feeling like it's you're somehow doing something wrong by taking money. It's like like uh, the only time that I feel differently from that is the goddamn media companies that want to give you nothing. It's like, come on.
Right.
But like it's always sort of hard to be like, oh, please pay me to do something.
Yeah, no, I think it's, I mean, part of it too is want, at least for me, it's, wanting to share, whether it's the subject you're passionate about or something you've like you have experience and background in and you Um, and we have all this, I say we have all this training as educators. I was not, my training was not, it was like a couple of seminars and they're like, go teach college.
Right.
Um, but yeah, there's like the essentially we've been trained to like get through like to learn and then also teach at a certain level, and we want to like, right, we have that training, we want to do that. That's why we invest time into it. They're just, like there's just like difficulties and layers where it's like, yeah, normally I wouldn't, it's not like students in a university are paying us, right? They're paying the college
Yeah.
for the privilege of being taught by us, essentially. Um, and then we're paid by our departments for whatever we're doing. So there's that sort of disconnect there where but you still want, like, we've had office hours, like you want to be able to meet and, tell people like, no, it's bullshit that people think Santa's Odin or whatever, right? Like, stop saying these sorts of things, please. It makes me angry in a way I can't describe. But um, and then it's also like coming at where you, when you and I were novices too, right? And it was more difficult to knowing how hard it can be to sort of parse through bullshit.
Right. And knowing that most people who are really interested in this, like just by probability, live nowhere close to a university where they can take classes about it. And even if they do, may not have the financial wherewithal to enroll in the university to take such a class.
Yeah, I mean that's a whole, like, the university itself is like, as a structure and a system, is just a whole level that makes it like what we train to do and want to do at a certain level. The only place we can makes it extremely difficult for people to get that from us in a way, right?
Yeah.
Uh, which I think is where where yeah, like where this idea of yours came in, right? It's like, how do I do that at a way that I can do that at a reasonable, you know, time investment and monetary investment on everyone's part, that it feels good.
Well,
And
and also, I mean, like one thing that I like about this system, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe this will actually not turn out to be true, but I think is because the materials are recorded and because like if you took it in spring, you can do it again in summer if you want. Like that self-pacing means that unlike with a university class where like you've got to be tested at this week on this stuff, the from the way I see it, what you're paying for is not a credential, it's you're paying for a skill, and then you can get the skill when you want the skill, and you can get as much of it as you want, if that makes sense, right? Like you're gonna finish if you're at UCLA and taking Old Norse 101 from me, you're gonna get a grade for Old Norse 101 at the same time as everybody else does.
yeah,
But if this is Old Norse 101, then you're doing it for your personal satisfaction rather than a grade on a paper anyway. But like you decide when you've gotten that skill, if that
yeah,
makes sense. Anyway,
yeah, exactly. Like, you feel, confident that, going and you're like, oh no, actually I can do all this. Right. Like, even sitting. But it's always nice too to like, it's not like I don't ever still have to go back to some of like the German case table things, when you get into, or tense, when you get into like passive, like the building will be built, or like, wait, what's the verb construction, like what three verbs do I need and how do they get conjugated like for this particular sentence. um
so what you're saying is you're offering a German class too.
Absolutely not. That would be uh that would be that would take a little more time on my, maybe in the future, I'll say, but that's a whole other bag of worms.
German for DeFries slash ZMAC slash Norrain reading knowledge. Uh, all right. I don't think I saw other questions per se about the classes. So if you still got a minute, I thought we should talk a little bit about some of your uh Holsing's work.
Sure. I mean, I'm yeah happy to if we want to do that today.
Well,
Um,
I got you here.
yeah, I guess I don't. I guess for the background on my own, Saga of the Volsungs was sort of like yes during my undergraduate and training was the saga I took most interest in among the many readings and things we did. But then as a graduate project, I wrote about Saga of Volsungs and Django Unchained, the film by Quentin Tarantino, and the Nibelung. I was a German major, so Das Nibelungenlied was in there as well. But sort of placing we'll say placing Django Unchained as part of a wider Sigurd the Dragon Slayer narrative. Yes, yes, Stella, I think we talked about this the last time I was on. Right, and thinking about how I mean, really, a lot of ways, it was like a weird historiography of that actual narrative of like the different permutations. It's got like the different versions, we'll call it, of it. Like different sort of cultural approaches to this narrative, and then moving through time, and then you have this very contemporary spaghetti western that actually feels, I think, in a lot of ways, like much closer to Saga of the Volsungs than something like Wagner's opera does at times,
I think
right?
in mood, yeah, in
Oh
mood,
yeah.
certainly, yeah.
Um,
What would you, or
it's,
but sorry to interrupt, but I was just thinking like what, so I jumped in and said in mood, what do you mean?
by mood or oh
Oh,
like
what do you mean that that's closer? Because I just jumped in and thought, yeah, sure, that sounds true to me in terms of mood, but maybe me interrupting you actually is.
I think no mood like for me it's generically, and I don't mean that like as a genre in a way almost, right? Is you have this work by like Wagner is essentially taking the Nibelungen lead and sort of mixing in elements of the Old Norse stuff. Like, right, like you have all of the gods, they just have German names. The story structure's kind of split between the two. But it is this like, Gesamtkunstwerk or whatever of his, right? Where it's this like super high art opera that's viewed over hours and hours and hours. Where to me, um, like when you read Saga of the Volsungs, something that's striking to me, especially, is like how short the sections are
Mhm.
in a way, like, and the way the information comes to you is it feels it's much more, and it makes sense, like folk tale, but like mythic sort of like um, language to it. And you and I have talked about this before, right? But I maintain that the closest contemporary genre to the Old Norse sagas and these things is actually the Western,
Yeah, absolutely.
right? Just because, like you said, mood, right? But also you think about like it's frontier literature in a way, right? Like this is like the edges, like people living in difficult conditions where um, there isn't a at least Saga of the Volsungs, right? Like it's a blood feud sort of story in some ways, but there's no central authority, like right where it's like it is frontier literature of groups of people making do. Um, you have honor. There's not gunslinger duels, right? But people's honor is challenged and has to be met in a way that's similar. Um, and there's like a much more wandering aspect to it, right? Of like someone you going from like place to place and seeing these things that just, to me, something like Django Unchained captures that much, like it captures it better in a lot of ways than something like Wagner's opera does.
Yeah, and I think that it's more character driven, right? I mean, the motivation that gets you through the story is, what is, well, who is Django or who is Gudrun,
Right.
right? And like what do they need to do and like them getting it done. Like, and then, you know, yeah, they're both very episodic, right? I mean, like there's all
Yeah.
kinds of sort of random encounters through both sorts of stories, but there's a fundamental drive in in the characters. I feel like Wagner, and to some extent, 19th and 20th and 21st century works that are more derivative of him are trying to be statements in a way that I never feel like sagas are trying to be. Um, I don't, I,
Yeah, yeah, right. Like they're purporting like some like authenticity or sort of like greater truth, like in a lot of ways, right? Like they're um putting something out there that's not necessarily like, Saga of the Volsungs is like my dad was violently killed by enemies. I have to raise an army to go and take revenge, and then I have a family, and then I am killed, and my child will go through and right. But it's just like different sort of vignettes of um, this family moving down there, right? And there is no. It's funny to think of sort of like the tragic, like I think a lot of people will look at some of these sagas and things, and the first analog they go to is something like a Greek tragedy, right? Where you have operas about them and sort of that tradition, and Wagner stepping in as just adapting the German to it. But it doesn't make sense with um, like I continued to laugh about the part in Saga of Volsungs where Sigurd finds out exactly what's going to happen, right? Like he is told verbatim, like this is your future, this is what's going to happen,
yeah,
and he does, and that's it. There's no moment of him lamenting or anything, right? It's just kind of it. He just goes on, and it happens because he can't act. I mean, you can think of it as like in the terms of like, well, Sigurd can't be anyone but Sigurd, right? Like he's going to be this hero and go on and continue to do this, and so it doesn't make sense for him to fight like to sort of have an existential crisis against this fate, right? No, he's just like the saga plays out.
yeah. And actually, I guess he's sort of told everything that's going to happen to him twice because,
Oh yeah, right. Like you get like your second chance, man. Like you can, like you sure you can trust these guys type of things.
yeah,
Well, and Sigurd's got to be like, well, yeah, we're sworn brothers, right? Like they would never break this
they would
this
never do this
bond,
thing. They would never do this thing they're fated to do. Uh,
right? That that I've been told explicitly that they will do. Um,
and I think
just
I like here's another thought about kind of that difference of mood and such. Like, I think Wagner would have a bigger problem if he were to come to 2024 and see some reworking of his opera for a modern audience than I think the author of any saga would have coming to 2024 and see reworking of their story for a modern audience. Because I feel like Wagner puts so much of himself in it,
right,
so much of his values. And I feel like the sagas might come from a time with different values, but I feel like they can still work because they're not propaganda literature. They can still work in a time with different values in a way that Wagner. I feel like the Ring has aged more poorly than the Saga of the Volsungs is more or less what I'm saying.
yeah. I mean, I think too exactly like to that point. There's also I mean, there's the understanding that I feel, the author of Saga of the Volsungs, even something like Dusty Belungenlied would understand is that it's not um, definitive in a way, right? That there's an acknowledgement of working through like a particular narrative tradition and expressing it in like whatever sort of cultural or historical moment you want,
Hmm.
right? For it. Because I mean, the oldest manuscripts, Das Nibelungenlied is like if we think about it, is sort of a later type. It's like a knightly romance story, right? Like there's courtly politics. Um, the structure is very different than the sort of blood feuding, or you like feuding sort of social system set up in Saga of the Volsungs. But we have older manuscripts for the Nibelungenlied than we have for the complete Saga of the Volsungs one,
Right.
right? So like it's obviously I like well to me it feels obvious, but I would argue that there's um they have to know, right? Like they have their version of the story, but also like an acknowledgement of yeah, you might hear different, maybe his name's Sigurd, maybe his name's Siegfried, right? That it's like to them it's less um it's not grounded in like a hit like a real concrete historical fact outside of in Saga Volsung's adding Ragnar's little bit in there just so someone can say like I'm related to Odin, right?
Right.
No, I'm
Right.
related to Sigurd here.
Well, and I think part of that is just like it's that medieval author's culture where, well, there kind of isn't an author, right? There's just this
Right.
acknowledgement that there's many different, because like if you look at the Poetic Edda and the Codex Regius, it says in the prose after I want to say it's after Gudrun the two, according to this poem, we see that Sigurd was killed in the woods, but there are other traditions that he was killed in bed, and
Right.
Germans say that he was killed at a meeting or something. Like
Yeah.
it, it's. But if you read something like Wagner's already kind of anticipating our very 20th, 21st century idea that like there is a story. Um,
Yeah.
there's no there's no variation in it. Ironically, one of the stories that might have the most in common with the Volsungs or any other saga this way is something like Star Wars, where people disagree about what versions
Right.
of things are right. Did Han shoot first? And also like what's canon and what isn't. Like, do you acknowledge those 90s novels that a lot of people liked as being part of the canon, or do you say those are just canon? Do you accept the 2010s movies as part of your canon? Like,
Right.
I think that's actually sort of saga-like, those debates.
I think that's actually the way to get out of like in a way it's like oh that's part of the Star Wars saga tradition that it's not part of my, not part of my canon or
Right.
whatever, right? Right, you go like in this version,
And
sort of thing.
and of course I played with that a lot in writing the Star Wars
Yeah.
Sonic Saga. Oh, and Estella points out comic books too. And Stella pointed out the line in the play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, where the character called the player is asked if they know the Greek tragedies, and his reply is, "I can't say that we do. We're more of the love, blood, and rhetoric school." And that always reminded me of the sagas. And I think that's a
Yeah.
good, a good line. Um, I was also thinking about how, with like really modern fandoms are kind of good analogies uh, to the medieval author in a lot of ways, because even though someone might have originated Wolverine or the Hulk or whatever, no one owns that character. Not well, Marvel does, I guess. But like in terms of like the popular imagination, there's not one person who owns that character.
Right.
And so there become different traditions about like, how did he get his adamantium skeleton? Did he have claws before that, or
Yeah.
the claws new, or and like is this part of the continuity that we're talking about, or is it not? And you can kind of have your different Wolverines, right? You can have your like some people over here have their really 70s Wolverines. Some people here have the really 90s Wolverines. Some people here have the Hugh Jackman Wolverine.
Right.
Like and I think that you have something really similar to that going on with a lot of sagas. And not to
Right.
wander too off course, but Django is just another.
Right. Yeah. I think the problem today is like there's actual because there's a an entity that can own Wolverine or whoever, right, that can establish a canon that, modernity has taught us to respect in some way, like, right? Um, like fandom culture and this sort of official canon culture, that's why they clash in a
Hmm.
way, is that you have um that idea that well there is an official bird like right or something, or there's like a canonical set one, someone owns this and can decide what to do with it instead of um, a like you mentioned before, right? That's like, well, we have a story where this guy dies this way and this way and this way, and here's the one that that I know, but other people tell it different.
Hmm. And I suspect, if you went to the right center during the Viking Age, say you go to Kalpong or Hedeby
Yeah.
or Birka or whatever, I suspect that, there's a version of the story there that kind of everybody knows. And if the version there is that Sigurður is killed in bed and you say, oh, well, like when he was killed in the woods, they'll call you an idiot. Like they won't hesitate to say, no, you don't know the story.
Like that's not, we're talking about different people, right?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that someone who's, well traveled in this period doesn't realize, oh, well, people tell this in maybe different ways.
Right.
Um, and I guess something similar happens in fandom now because you can say like, oh, Wolverine was born with the claws, and someone's else like, no, you're an idiot. They installed a Weapon X or whatever.
Yeah, with Project X when they put the metal on his skeleton, it
Yeah,
was cool.
but someone who can stand coolly above the fray, say, ah, there's a tradition here, this is this, and a tradition here, this is that, and it's a creator of so much. I believe the term is even like fanboy frustration, like, oh my God, they're so inconsistent about this. But if you actually just acknowledge the inconsistency as part of the tradition, one of the best, now we're wandering afield, and I'm sorry, but one of the best fandoms for acknowledging um, the differences in traditions is the James Bond uh, series, right?
Yeah.
Like he's not even the same guy,
Right.
in most of these movies. Um, like he
Now gets
has.
older, right?
Yeah, right. He never gets older. Like he radically changes background sometimes. Like and he has all these different love interests that sometimes seem to last longer or shorter. Like
Yeah.
I guess the Daniel Craig movies tried to make sort of a more continuous narrative, but like even the ones, that all have Sean Connery or all have Pierce Brosnan, or all have Roger Moore, like it's not like what does Dr. No tell you about Goldfinger, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Um, like that's an example of people like you can't be a James Bond fan without being like, yeah, who knows? Like it's just the idea of the character. And I think that's way more like the medieval attitude towards someone like Sigurdur. It's the idea of the character. It's not like the specific nitty-gritty of the details.
And you got to remember, like, by the time they're like we have these manuscripts, right? They are as removed from like Attila the Hun, like the sort of historical events of them, as we are from the actual manuscripts, right? Like they are part of a long-standing oral tradition, but what is maintained in different places at different times is like it's dependent, right? It's like what are they trying to emphasize or what are they showing as being valuable to them while like in the framework of this sort of narrative, right? That's the Saga of the Volsungs is a feuds, like, right? The major conflict is feuding, right? It's honor revenges and killing, and the Nibelungen lead is like it's a problem with primogeniture, right? It's can we be sure Gunther's kid is hit like after Siegfried's got to go and wrestle the Valkyrie Queen Kriemhild, right? And take her girdle. Like what
Right.
actually happened there, right? And that's when it's not a feud. It's Hagen going like, you got to go because you've now disturbed the possible line of succession here, which is very very different from um, my family's met like right or like we're sworn civil like we're sworn family members now but you have gold like we got to get rid of you somehow and that's the tension there even in Django, right? The tension is that he's a like a freed slave, right? Like it's like the societal convention being broken, um and then the consequences of that.
Right. Each story, in spite of using a lot of similar motifs and similar scenes, reflects different obsessions in the culture at large and on the part of the people composing it.
Right.
I mean,
While maintaining like but there was this guy Attila who pushed us west, right? Or whatever. Like it's
well, and then like I think that it's kind of one of the most amazing contrasts between like the German and the Norse tradition is the character of Hogne or Hagen,
right.
right? Because is he the most reasonable guy around, or is he, the scheming evil guy?
Yeah.
Uh, and Like that's kind of fascinating. Or the way that like the name Greenhilder, Creamhild, is that the daughter or is that the mom?
Yeah.
Um, there's and then if you add the Old English tradition, right, as reflected briefly in Beowulf,
Yeah.
there's clearly something even different going on there because there it's Sigmundur and his son nephew Fitala Sinfjoli, who's the dragon slayer. But it's not even clear if he is his son in that tradition because he's called his nephew in that very brief um, scene in Beowulf. Like I don't know, I'm kind of fascinated by all these questions, and I think, and maybe I'm wandering too far afield from what you want to talk about with this, but I think that the very fact that you have such various sources is an argument for being all the more attentive to what those sources really say. And I think that one of the best ways to like I wandered into the river Styx and I purged myself long ago of the need to know the exact objective answer to, who so and so is and who their father is and all that. Like I let me I'm at peace.
Yeah.
I don't have to there doesn't have to be an objective answer. But that makes me more sensitive to, well, but what does this one say? What
Right.
does this one say? Right? Like I don't it's also kind of made me say, no, I don't want to blend these. Right. I want to talk about like because like I've been doing these talks about the Volsungs at Meadkrieger
Right.
in March and April. It's like, okay, what I'm telling you is the saga of the Volsung. That is distinct from other instantiations of the Volsung mythos.
Right.
And although it's probably, boring my audience somewhat, like I like to take those aside to say, okay, that's what the saga says. Now let me tell you something that an older poem says, because
Yeah.
it kind of makes the story clearer and it might make you kind of realize ways that not just this saga, but other sagas are created out of older pieces. And it kind of, what it kind of reminds me of is, and I'm sorry for rambling. Um, there's a movie, Riff Tracks has done it. What's it called? The one with Christian Bale fighting dragons?
Oh, Rain of Fire.
Rain of Fire. It actually has a scene where uh, someone dresses in kind of a version of a Darth Vader costume.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think they reenact.
Yeah,
Uh,
and
they,
as
they, they tell Star Wars as they remember it or
right,
something. Yeah.
and as like this is probably no one's idea of a great movie, although it's pretty watchable, but it's not a great movie.
There's one brave soul in chat, Matt. Great movie. So
Okay, well, all right. I mean, I won't call it great, but it is watchable, and the riff track is definitely good. But I think that scene reflects exactly what happens to this culture if we fall apart tomorrow because of dragon attacks or whatever. Is that Star Wars and probably like Harry Potter, The Lord of the Rings, like those are the Volsungs of the next era, and probably my imagination is they all come together as one thing, just like the Volsungs starts absorbing stories. Um, And, in such a scenario, again, there's no George Lucas to say
right.
this is uh no, no, that's not what Vader does. You
Yeah.
know, that the idea passes into just meme status, just like Sigurdur and Fafnir and all these other characters did in the Middle Ages.
Yeah. No, and I mean I completely agree that like it's important to attend to the individual sort of variations of these. If only even to push back against the sort of like 20th century grand narrative tradition, like you know, like Joseph Campbell wanting like the idea of a monomyth, right? And trying to collapse them all into each other. And saying, like, yes, Sigurd and Siegfried, the name is the same based on sort of where you are, right? But they are like very different, right? And the actual texts express like the Nibelungen Lied, he doesn't like you don't get the like the dragon slaying has already happened,
Right.
right? Off screen, he just shows up and someone's like naming off the things he did, and it's funny to me that like that's not what's important. Him killing a dragon being this cool.
Right.
We don't need to. We just You just need to know that he did these things, right? The actual like the facts, like going through and doing it is irrelevant to the actual narrative.
And Peter Jackson's Nibelungen Lied, the dragon slaying as a whole movie.
Right. Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. It's great. Um, God, I mean, Long already has his like 4.5 hour version of it split between two. So, um, no, yeah, I agree that I'm much less interested in like some sort of like, especially with these narratives, sagas or this literature being like historically, like is this person actually their father, right? It's sort of like the problem with people going to the sagas trying to trace their own lineage in a way where
Yeah.
it's like I don't care too much about that as much as I also don't care that like it's when we talk about mythology, like one of the things like for me is like the fact that Old Norse mythology, for example, if you look at the poetic Edda, especially in comparison to the prose Edda, is not consistent, it's contradictory, it has all these things. And I feel like the response in some ways for a lot of people is like, well, how do we reconcile them? How do we fix it? Where to me, I'm like, no, let it be. Like, let it be not like disagreeing with one another,
Hmm.
right? Like it doesn't we don't we don't need it to just as much as like to me it doesn't matter like, oh, did they believe these stories, right? Sort of thing, where it's like, well, some did and some probably didn't. But to me, what's more important is that they were like, right? They were important enough that like the belief in them is less like I don't need that like they didn't need to believe in it. Like they were culturally significant, important stories that got passed down,
Hmm.
right? Um,
And I
and
think and I think that ties in with I think it's two major things you just hit there that are great points. One of which is I hadn't thought about that Joseph Campbell like monomyth tendency as being part of the enemy of presenting the stuff today. And
oh
I
yeah,
and I think a lot of what you see on the internet is more influence in that than people realize. Because how often do you see that all the freaking TikToks or Instagram reels or whatever about myth are all like there is a um there is a I don't know there they create these vague simultaneously super vague and super specific thing. There is a goddess of sleep who runs through every culture, and her
right,
name is blah 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 in this culture, and blah 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 in that culture, and blah 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 in that culture. And it means that when I present about Norse myth, I hear all these people who have watched, I think, it's usually like these TikToks and reels or whatever. We're like, well, what about so and so? And then they give me, a bunch of facts that are all mixed up from Celtic and Greek and Norse. It's like, oh, like what you're talking about is a 20th century synthesis, right? You're not seeing what is really, really various and often very fragmentary in our different sources. But another thing that you mentioned there that I think is important. Ah, I think I just in rambling about that, I forgot the other thing I was going to ramble about, which is probably good.
I think so. I mean, the other thing was mentioned, like the sort of like belief and truth value in the myths in a way, right? Like, did they?
Oh,
How
okay. Now I
important?
remember. Now I remember what I was going to ramble about. It's that I don't think that a medieval audience cared that much about whether something was true or not. I think even with the stories we tell today that are historically based, it's amazing how little anybody gives a shit about whether it's true or not, right? There is there is like a myth canon about World War II already.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? And like how many people who enjoy, just to take some different instantiations of this, Saving Private Ryan or Captain America, I think fits into this, frankly. Or whatever Hogan's Heroes, I don't know. Like
Right.
I'm amazed by how many people who will watch this sort of thing cannot tell me what years World War II happened.
Right. Back, 1940, blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
Like,
Or, like it, and characters become archetypes, right? There's not like even a movie that's pretty well researched, that's based on actually fanatically researched book like American Prometheus, Oppenheimer, has elements of that like World War II mythos to it. Um, like I don't feel like the character, this is getting into the weeds, but I don't feel like the way Harry Truman is presented there as acted by Gary Oldman, I feel like that's very World War II mythos, but I don't feel like it's Harry Truman. Um, Harry Truman left uh, exquisite records of his presidency and his thoughts about every stage of everything. And like it just doesn't read like him. But it reads like a kind of an accepted mythos about who he was.
Yeah.
And I
I
think
mean,
that you get something very similar. Like, so even if Atli has some ultimate basis in Attila and Jormunrekkr has some ultimate basis in Ehrmann that's 900 years from where this stuff is being written down. And we already distort the memory of people who lived 80 years ago.
right, exactly. Um, I mean, storytelling's weird, right? Like you just get like new traditions. I think today there's an emphasis on what I'll call like legibility, right? Like having these archetypes that are easy to like grasp onto in a way um that if you're familiar at all with like generic conventions or something, you know who the character is before they do anything in a
Yeah.
way, right? But yeah, Stella mentions here like westerns, right? The sort of like mythic side, but you have like the unnamed gunslinger, right? Where if you've seen more than two westerns and you see it again, right? Like you sort of understand like if there's an unknown gunslinger comes to town, like you have like this built-in like archetype frame of reference that the story either plays into or against, but
Mhm.
it's in a way that has to be legible, that is not in the same sense as like mythic material a lot of the time, right? Where they
Right.
can't it's just too diffuse, right? And there's too many different traditions and examples of it where you can't have that easy legibility.
And
Um,
and
Go
think
ahead.
about how bad movies and bad books are at this. We're both connoisseurs of bad movies and bad books. Like, think how long Super Constitution takes in establishing how special its characters are, when you could have a much more economical story by just like painting with the lightest strokes to suggest like, okay, what archetype am I thinking about here?
The Dan Brown approach, right? Like
Yeah.
the genius linguist standing room only. um,
Gulping
yeah.
orange juice. Yes.
I'm gonna have to um, step away for a bit. So
Oh,
take
sure.
gotta
Sure.
do nap time, everything else. I want to say thank you to everyone for having me for the questions. Um, I will get a hold of Jackson about the class once I have whatever page and whatever form it takes done. Like I said, hopefully today, tomorrow. I'm gonna leave in the chat my incognito email that I'm using for the course. So if you have other um, questions about it or want to reach out to me, you can go and
Google.com, is that a thing?
or not at gmail.com. Sorry. Weird. This is the problem here.
Yeah, I was like,
There we
oh,
go. We'll just
sorry.
delete that other one. Delete message. There we go. Um, that's the email I'll be using for the course. I mean, you can find my publicly available emails just as easily, but that's the one that has no emails in it currently, and I'm able to get back much easier. So
Nice. Nice.
thank you all again, though. I really appreciate it, Jackson. Thank you so much for having me. Um,
Hey, thanks for coming.
we should just
And
have like a we should just have like a ramble cast one time where you like we see how many different tangents. Like we like they can pick the topic we start on and let's just see where we end up by the end.
it would be like Gardic phone or something, like
Right, yeah,
you wouldn't
exactly.
even recognize what it had started from. Yeah.
Steps, yeah. But like they talked about this and now we're here. So
I would do it anytime.
all right. Thank you all very much.
All the best,
Enjoy.
everybody.
Yeah, exactly. All the best.